What is up, and I welcome each and every one of you back to a brand new Civ 6 or Civilization 6 video. Today we're not going to be talking about any sort of guides or any sort of top tips or fucking Pangea playthrough number 576, that'll come later. But today we're going to be talking about the biggest problem in the history of not just Civ games, but also just 4X games in general. For those of you who don't know, 4X stands for explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate. Now, let's just get to the chase, right? No clickbait needed. The biggest problem in just these types of games in general, especially in Civ, is the snowball mechanic. The snowball mechanic is by far the big. It's just terrible. You know whether you're going to win or not by about turn 50 to turn 60 every single 4X game, no matter what. And it really is just the design of 4X games. I'm going to be talking about why that's a problem, and then I'm going to be talking about how Civ 5 allegedly fixed the problem, and then we can talk about how Civ 6 actually fixed the problem. So just spoiler alert, I've never played Civ 4, so I have no idea how cities work in Civ 4, how happiness worked in Civ 4, how bad was it, what was the optimal city strategy, is the snowball mechanic even big there? I have no idea, right? I don't know. Let me know down below in the comments exactly, those of you who played Civ 4, exactly how the snowballing was in Civ 4, and if you have enjoyed, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and without further ado, let's get started. Like I mentioned in the intro, the biggest problem with 4X games is the snowball mechanic. Now, really how 4X games work is, in general, you're just going to go ahead, you're going to settle a city, you're going to settle as many cities in sort of like this open world, and you sort of like choose where you want to settle, what resources you want to exploit, what exactly you want to do, which is really fun, really popular. Explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate. Although when you look at this, exploring, fine, okay. Expanding, alright, expanding cities is nice. Exploiting resources help you, but it isn't too crazy. It's really exterminate that really gets the snowball rolling. You know, every single game, if you knock out an enemy civ or two, you have so many more cities and therefore so many more yields. The way 4X games also work, especially Civ, is the more cities you have, the more yields you will make. Obviously, right? If we could take Civ 6 for an example, if you have 10 cities with fully stacked campuses with research labs, they're going to make a lot more science than 5 cities with stacked research labs. It's just in general. Obviously, there are some different things, right? The adjacency bonus, what city-states you're suzerain of, all that stuff. But in general, on a level playing field, the more cities you have, the more resources you are going to get. And if you have twice as many cities as everybody else, you are going to have a snowball mechanic. The way this usually works in this game is you start off by being just a little bit ahead of the AI, right? You have maybe 20 cities, the AI has 10. You're making a little bit more science than them, but the thing is, with that little bit more science, you're going to be researching technologies faster, so you're going to have more advanced units faster, you're going to have more science buildings faster, or more culture buildings for that matter, and therefore just the snowball starts. You get research faster, you get some science, you build science faster than the other guys, you're going to have more science, and it just sort of snowballs out of control. And the reason for that is, like I said, every city being able to build their own yields and every city pretty much essentially the cap being equal. You have a certain amount of districts that you can build, and each district will provide you a certain amount of every yield. There isn't like any RNG or any cheating or anything like that. And this is a problem. This is a problem, and I'll explain why in the next segment. Now, like I mentioned in the previous one, the problem is the fact that if you do go for like an early war, I like to call it, and exterminate your nearest neighbors, you're going to have twice as many resources as you normally would, which could lead to you absolutely snowballing the game out of control. But we're going to talk about how they sort of fixed it in Civilization 5. In Civ 5, again, I haven't played Civ 4, so anybody talking about snowballing in Civ 4, let me know down below in the comments exactly how it was a problem. But I started playing in Civ 5, and Civ 5 wasn't really sort of an empire builder like Civ 6 is. It is more focused on the exploration and building aspects of Civ building, if that makes any sense. There were really two mechanics in Civ 5 that sort of fixed, I guess, the snowball mechanic. Number one was happiness, number two was penalties, and then there's also a third one that doesn't mean as much, and that is how strong cities were in Civ 5. Now, happiness in Civ 5 is absolutely crippling. There's a global happiness modifier, right? The amount of happiness decreases per city you settle and per population you have. It's three happiness per city settled and -1 happiness per population. Why do people get unhappy if you settle like more cities? I have no no idea. I don't know what kind of crack these people are smoking. You know, you'd think like more cities is like, hey, we're expanding, we're the dominant species, let's go. But no, it's not that at all. The problem with happiness wasn't so fact that it was a metric, it was that it went too far. When you had negative happiness, when you went to -1 happiness, the first stage, your growth slows by like 75%, and every happiness you're under, you lose 2% production in all cities. It is absolutely insane how big of a penalty it was, happiness-wise. And early game being the most important part meant that if you just went out and started spamming cities or going for an early war or something, you'd easily be cracking -10 to -15 happiness. And if you do that, it's just, you're not going to come back from that. It's going to take you so many technologies to research, like the circus and the Colosseum, to get your happiness back. You know, maybe a couple wonders would help, but most of the time happiness was so rare to get, but so easy to lose. And that was a problem that prevented people from settling as much as they could. A lot of the time, the best strategy was to just settle 4 or 5 cities and just build up your empire from there. There was no war, there was no anything like that. Get the National College early on, and pray to God no one snowballed out of control, because the AI has just like a massive cheat. You know, the AI in Civ 6 games. Civ 5, it had like infinite happiness for some reason. When the happiness screen came up, they were like 100 happiness with like 50 cities. It was insane. But that isn't even the biggest problem. The biggest problem, in my opinion, was the penalties you got per city. For each city you settled, you had a penalty. Now, what that means is, in order to research a culture civic tree, a culture policy they called it, and in order to research the next tech, the cost scaled by how many cities you had. So if you had 1 city, it would cost like 100 science to research a technology. If you had 2, it would cost like 125. I don't know the exact metric for it, but it was pretty bad by the time you got to 9, 10, 11 cities. So even if you did spend all that time settling like 15, 20 cities, you know, making sure your happiness is on point, trading for every luxury in existence, you still had to deal with the fact that you really don't have an advantage, because yes, you have like twice as much science as everybody else, but also your tech costs are literally almost 3 times as much as everybody else, which is insane. And all that time you spent building military units and researching military technologies could have been used in sort of just snowballing your lead by just building like National College and getting a lot of libraries in every city. Now, the third problem, in my opinion, how it was fixed and how it went a little too far, was the fact that cities in Civ 5 were no joke. Like, Civ 6, you know, if you early enough throw enough warriors at it, the city will fall. Civ 5, no. You needed an actual army. I'm not joking. You could bring Alexander the Great back from the dead, and he wouldn't be able to take out more than 1 or 2 cities in Civ 5. It's absolutely insane. Every city automatically came with walls, a free ranged attack. Like, it was just absolutely insane, the amount of damage. You couldn't attack with just melee units. You needed, and I'm not even joking, 6 archers or 2 to 3 catapults. And take in, catapults have to move, and then they won't be able to attack. So if you move your catapults into position and the enemy AI focuses your catapults, you could lose them in 1 turn. So a lot of the time, you had to build like 6 archers and 3 warriors, and you couldn't even put cities under siege in Civ 5, at least I don't think. So it was so hard and took so many resources to take out a city. Like in Civ 6, if you research ironworking fast enough, 3 to 4 swordsmen is all you're really going to need, and you could just upgrade them from warriors for pretty cheap. Civ 5, you need like 6 archers, 2 warriors just to take out like a struggling city, honestly. It was absolutely insane. And what's your reward for that? Negative insane amounts of happiness for occupation. You'd have to build the courthouse, which comes in a classical era technology, like late classical era. And because of that, like your cities would not only generate the -4 like let's say it's a 5 population city. It would generate -3 for the city, -5 for the population, that's 8. But it would also generate more unhappiness because it is occupied until you get the courthouse. It was absolutely insane. Conquering a decent-sized city, you would lose at least 10 happiness. It was just an absolute insane amount of happiness lost, and that was really a big problem. Civ 5, as great as it was and as fun and good as I think it is, it isn't sort of an empire builder. It's more of a city builder, if that makes any sense. It is still great, but they kind of removed the exterminate and expand from the 4X. You could really only explore and exploit. Obviously, you could go for a domination victory and still dominate, you know, building a butt ton of units, but a lot of the times you weren't going to get a technological advantage too high, not like in Civ 6. But yeah, let's now go talk about how they sort of reverted the changes in Civ 6 and then the catastrophe that ensued. And now we get into the current generation. Civ 6, when it released in 2016, was a really different game, honestly. I could consistently beat Civ 5 on deity, but in Civ 6, I had to sort of relearn the game, and it was kind of a decent learning curve. I had to play a couple of games of King, Emperor, and then eventually I did make my way up back to Immortal and deity, but it was not easy. Civ 6 from Civ 5 was almost a completely different game, and one of the big changes was in Conquest. That is right, they brought the 4x back. Instead of 3x, they finally had Exterminate back, and you best believe Geneva was working absolute insane hours because everyone was breaking the Geneva Convention. The biggest reasons is they removed the 3 biggest problems in Civ 5 that prevented you from expanding and exterminating. Number 1 was happiness. They removed that and installed an amenity system, which was like a per city type of thing, and they also increased ways you could get amenities. Entertainment complexes, the Temple of Artemis, luxuries gave you amenities for multiple cities, which was really good for the amenity thing, and not so good for Conquest, because now players could go ahead and take out enemy cities. And speaking of which, enemy cities were now so much easier to take. No longer did they have the free ranged attack, and they were so weak that if you rushed with enough warriors, you could easily take out a city or two. If you go for a swordsman rush and a battering ram, you could exterminate an empire so fast. Heck, battering rams used to work on horsemen. Horsemen. Do you realize how broken that was? That was absolutely insane. Alexander was the best Civ by far. Gilgamesh was like S-tier Civ. Everyone with a military unit and a cavalry unit especially was at least A-tier. They could have had no other buffs. Instead, they could have just had like an early cavalry unit. They'd still be S-tier. That's how broken it was. With the fact that cities were weaker and the fact that luxuries, really there was no global happiness mechanic, it was removed in favor of amenities, which was a lot easier to deal with, because even at like -2, 3 amenities, you're losing 10% of all yields, which is a lot better than losing like 75% of your growth rate and a massive penalty to science, culture, your love life. All that stuff was just being penalized by Civ 5 global happiness. But in Civ 6, they did remove that. Amenities were a lot easier to deal with, but the biggest thing is that they removed tech scaling costs. No longer did you have more techs to do, more science needed to research a technology if you had more cities. Instead, they replaced that by making the settlers cost more per settler and districts costing more to build per tech, I guess. So if you're in the medieval era, districts were a lot more expensive than in the ancient era, but the scaling in districts was kind of even. So like ancient era, you're not going to have a lot of production. Medieval era, you're going to have a decent amount of production. So a lot of the times, districts were still being built in around 10 to 15 turns in most cities, no matter what era you were in. So district scaling cost really wasn't too effective. And with the settler cost, the first 3 or 4 settlers were super cheap, but what happened was everyone would just conquer AI cities. Like you put it on deity, the enemy AI starts with 3 cities, you build a couple horsemen, get a battering ram or 2, just go ahead and blow up 2 to 3 civilizations, and the game is already over. It was so goddamn fun, but it was so broken too, especially multiplayer. If you wanted to play like a sort of like a turtle type game in Civ 6 base game multiplayer, you weren't able to do that. Someone's going to come in with 5 to 6 horse units and absolutely destroy you. It was absolutely disgusting. But they reverted the changes in Civ 6, or were they changes? I don't know. I never played Civ 4. But taking cities was so much easier now. And instead of 3Xs, they re-added Exterminate. And boy, the Geneva Convention was working overtime. It was absolutely insane. Everyone was going to war. And yeah, if you weren't going to war, you weren't playing the game right. And it wasn't too hard either. But really, they did add a mechanic later on in the Rise and Fall expansion, which I think helped the situation a lot and might have even fixed it. Rise and Fall was the first big expansion in Civilization 6, and it was a big one. It added governors, it added different leaders, it added different luxuries as well, but the biggest thing in my opinion was the loyalty mechanic and the ages mechanic. Now let's talk about loyalty first. Loyalty works by how much loyalty your city has towards you, which is influenced by a number of ways: the proximity of enemy cities, the proximity of your cities, the population in your cities, the population in enemy cities, were essentially the big ones. So now if you wanted to declare war on somebody and go take them out, you had to deal with loyalty. And a lot of the time, the AI will have a lot of population. So if you take out one of their outer cities, the lower population ones, you did have a problem, right? Because if you left that city and left a unit garrisoned in there, it would rebel in maybe 6 or 7 turns, putting you on a timer. If you can't take the enemy cities in 6 or 7 turns, you are going to lose that city to a rebellion. And if you do, well, that's kind of a problem because you're going to have to retake the city, which spawned with 3 or 4 melee units, and they would absolutely be able to defend themselves if need be. Not to mention you are also on another timer because in 10 turns, the city's going to flip back to the enemy civ you just conquered it from. And that is what made warfare a lot less weak. There were some other changes like removing battering rams from working on horsemen, which was so broken early on. It was so much fun just playing somebody like Gilgamesh or Alexander, just absolutely destroying enemy walls that way. But they did fix it with loyalty. And the other thing is the ages mechanic. If you were in a dark age, you got a penalty towards loyalty pressure. If you were in a golden age, you got a bonus. If you were in a normal age, nothing really happened, so we don't want to worry about that. But if you were in a golden age or a dark age and the enemy was in a golden age, you're not taking any other cities. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if some of your cities started beginning to rebel as well. Loyalty was a big add to the game. But I think the biggest thing is the fact that loyalty wasn't too far. It wasn't Civ 5 where you had impossible to take cities, scaling tech costs, and obviously the happiness problem. It was, okay, you actually had to use your brain for it. Okay, let me see. If I go ahead and take out this city, I'll struggle with loyalty, but then if I take out that city in 5 or 6 turns, I should be okay. Can I take that city out in 5 turns? Okay, so you actually had to be, if you were good enough at the game and you were smart enough and experienced enough, you would be able to go around the loyalty mechanic problem. If not, you would just struggle with loyalty. So no longer was it just, oh, easy, just bonk the enemy a couple times and take their cities. It was, okay, you're on a timer, you got to declare war, not to mention that your units were also being grinded down, and the fact that the AI loved to build catapults for some reason. So you were already getting ranged attack by catapults. The fact that they added loyalty mechanic was definitely a big boon to the health of the game, I think. Instead of domination being really the only way to the best optimal way by far, you could still go domination, but a lot of the times, that really opened up a turtle type of path, maybe 6 to 8 cities and then turtle up for the late game was definitely a good strategy now, and it was definitely still viable, so that definitely helped a lot. But we're going to talk about why this is still kind of a problem in Civ 6. Now, I did say that loyalty did help Civ 6 a lot when it came to preventing enemy cities from being dead, but it really didn't prevent any of the core problems, if that makes sense. If you could get past the loyalty and take out some enemy cities, you would still snowball just as well. It was still kind of like Civ 6 base game if you were just able to walk around the loyalty mechanic. And that's kind of a problem because as the years went on, obviously, Gathering Storm, new Civs, Current Columbia, Hammurabi, Babylon, a lot of units, a lot of new unique units, a lot of new abilities were made, so that you would easily be able to go ahead and take out enemy cities in 2 to 3 turns max. And with that came back sort of the problem of, as well as people getting smarter, that, okay, take out a couple enemy cities, early war, break some treaties, human right violations, all that good stuff. I probably get canceled for that's getting demonetized, I think. But yeah, you do that stuff in Civ 6, obviously the game of Civ 6, you are going to be able to snowball out of control as you were in the base game, and the game would pretty much be over in 50 to 60 turns. Now, I don't know exactly what they could have done to fix this. The only way you really could have prevented anything like this is the fact that adding a text scaling, maybe not as bad as Civ 5, but if you added a text scaling per amount of cities, it could have made it so that you could go 10 to 15 cities easily, and you, excuse me, you'd still be at an advantage, but it wouldn't be such an insurmountable advantage that someone who turtled couldn't win the game as well. But in my opinion, loyalty was decent for the most part, but there's still a domination problem in Civ 6 in general. Before we end off the video, I do want to talk about two other games that are part of the 4X genre that I think have done a good job at fixing the sort of snowball mechanic type of thing, being Humankind and being Old World. Now, Old World, I don't like it a lot. I mean, it's fine. It's not a game I'd play endlessly, though. I don't know. It's just opinion. It seems like a fun game, but I just don't like it as much. But the way Old World does it is cities actually have a specific spot you can settle them in. Like, there's already city outposts, and you can only settle on those outposts, leaving a limited amount of cities on the map. I think that's an interesting mechanic, but it's sort of like the game is forcing you to settle on these city spots, and you're not able to make any of your own city spots, if that makes any sense. I don't know if it does. But the fact that there are outposts that you have to settle on and you can't settle anywhere else, limiting the amount of cities means that war is still going to be a problem, but at the end of the day, there's still only a limited amount of cities. So even if you do settle as much as you can, you're really going to be even with the AI. And if you're able to go ahead and take out the AI cities, sure, you'll be at an advantage. But again, the AI can only have so many cities due to this mechanic, so I feel like Old World did a decent job at fixing it. But really, Humankind, I think the game Humankind, and I've been talking about it a lot, but Humankind definitely did a great job with this snowball mechanic. Snowball is still in the game, and it'll always be in the game, in these games, Civ, Humankind, Old World, because more cities means more resources. But the way they did it is they had sort of a city cap limit in Humankind, so you could have just a number of outposts and attach them to one city, sure, but you're not going to have multiple cities building multiple yields, doing multiple things, which means that, with the city cap on, and if you go over the city cap, you are going to lose a lot of influence, meaning you're not going to have influence for a lot of other things, like civics, for example. Your culture isn't going to spread as fast, and your, like, sort of soft power, your influence, isn't going to be able to convert other civs, and you might get converted and get a penalty when going to war. But I feel like they did a great job on that. The other thing they did is add the war score system. So it's kind of like a paradox game. It's kind of like EU4 in a way, where you have war support, the enemy has war support. Even if you end up with 100 war support and they end up with 0, you're still not going to have enough to take out the enemy completely. You might be able to take a city and an outpost, but the snowballing is sort of linear, whereas in Civ, it is sort of just like, oh, I've completely exterminated an enemy Civ in 10 turns, game's over, GG, well played. No. Right? Even if you do end up taking the enemy city out, the fame mechanic is still in play, so if someone's just being really agrarian and building a lot of stuff and having a lot of culture, they still might win the game over you, whereas you still get an advantage from taking out enemy cities, you weaken another empire, you are going to still be getting more yields, more districts to build, more cities, but with the city cap, along with the influence penalty from going over the city cap, along with the war score system preventing how much you can take, limiting how much you can take, I feel like Humankind has done the best job so far, and I'd love to see something similar in a Civ 7 iteration in the future, but yeah, it's just me. That's going to be the end of the video. If you have enjoyed, as always, like and subscribe. Helps out the channel a ton. Let me know if you want me to continue doing these discussion videos. I've had a lot of fun making this one, and I do have a lot that I could potentially do in the future. So let me know down below in the comments if you really like this video. Thumbs up, sub, all that good stuff. And without further ado, I will see you all in the next video. Peace. Also, Scout Only Challenge coming later today. Bye. Huge shout out to my members, Cash Christian, Ben Omby, John Blair, Jackson Perez, Polaris Gaming, Emporium, Adam Mester, Jeff Utzler, Kim Cosmos. A really special shout out to my Oh My God subscribers, Robert and Overflow of Amenities.